Great. Okay, we are now recording. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the first in our webinar series for the public this season. If you're joining us, you are probably an AIARE student or an interested AIARE student or maybe a future AIARE student. Really glad to have you here joining us to learn a little bit about some winter route finding. My name is Emma Walker and I'm the AIARE Curriculum Manager. I just want to give a quick plug for AIARE as an organization before I turn it over to our speakers this evening. So AIARE, as you probably know, is a nonprofit organization, and we exist to create Avalanche education curriculum for recreational and professional users. We also update that curriculum regularly with best practices so that you can be sure that you're always getting the best Avalanche education with the most up-to-date information when you take an AIARE course. We also do professional training for folks like ski patrollers and avalanche educators, and we train instructors such as Jason, who's here tonight. He'll be saying a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But like I said, AIARE is a nonprofit organization. We have a small office staff. We're fully remote, so we're spread out across the country, but our headquarters is in Vail. That's where our executive director lives. So we have about 8 full-time office staff, and then we also have some contractors who train instructors, and then we have about 500 instructors spread across the country who teach for various providers. So you yourself, having taken a course, probably know a couple of AIARE instructors. So those are the folks who teach our curriculum and who are using these skills not only in their courses, but also in their day-to-day life with all of the other outdoor stuff they do, like Jason. So really excited to have onX Backcountry here. They're a sponsor of ours this season, and they have generously offered a discount code, which I know Charlie will talk about in a few minutes, for an onX subscription for AIARE students this season. So you'll learn a little bit more about how to take advantage of that. And then obviously you'll learn about how to actually use onX Backcountry. So with that end spiel, and I'm going to turn it over to Charlie and Jason.
Thanks, Emma. Make sure I'm set up here. Cool. So I'm Charlie Avis. I'm a senior product manager at onX Backcountry. And yeah, we're excited to kind of go over how to plan a ski tour in our tool today with Jason Antin, who I'll introduce here in a second. This QR code, if you were to scan it with your phone, will get you the app, and you can use the code on the screen here, AIARE20 for 20% off. If you'd like to follow along today, feel free to do that now. That's my plug, but otherwise, yeah, I hope you can learn something about, the tools that we offer skiers, as well as just about, how to think about planning a tour in the backcountry in general, as Jason is a wealth of knowledge in that subject. So I'll leave this screen up for just a little bit longer, but I'm going to introduce Jason Antin, who's going to kind of walk through how he goes about planning a ski tour, and then we'll kind of in tandem walk through how that relates to onX Backcountry and how you can use that tool to kind of augment that experience. So Jason Antin is an onX backcountry athlete. He's a coach for uphill athlete and an AIARE instructor. And he's a director at the Colorado Mountain School and a certified rock guide, and just a general badass in the backcountry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and have him say a few words.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Jason Antin here, hailing out of Golden, Colorado. And guess what? It's snowing outside, which is pretty sweet for conditions coming up, or not, depending on how you read the Avalanche Forecast and what sort of terrain you're traveling in. My goals for the night is be a resource for you all. If you're up for it, throw your name and where you're calling in from in the chat box, so I kind of know what kind of snowpacks that we're working with. And of course, feel free to add if you have any AIARE education there. As Emma kicked things off with, this is certainly an AIARE experience, and taken straight from them, education saves lives. And I hope the next 30 to 60 beyond minutes is just yet another resource for you all to become better mountain travelers. And I'm seeing some great stuff. I see Baker, Steamboat, Seattle, keep them coming. I love seeing this. So thanks for sharing. Fort Collins, Mammoth Lakes. We've got a few folks from Denver. This is fantastic. So we're getting snowpacks that are all across the board. I'll do my best to speak to all of them, but we're certainly going to be using my backyard here, just outside of Golden, Colorado, as our template for this evening. But I'll do my best to relate anything that I bring up tonight to your own hometown snowpack zones. I stole this from Ian McCammon, and it rings true to me. There's kind of five major things, five major buckets or categories that make you a good backcountry skier or rider. Number one is the ability to recognize avalanche terrain or know when it's above you. Number two is your Avi rescue skills. Number three is understanding the seasonal snowpack. Number four, learning how to manage terrain and keep things safe, mitigating your risk. And the last one's learning how to manage your group and move that group through terrain. Tonight, I really want to help you continue to build your skill set on number 1, 4, and 5. So number 1, recognizing avalanche terrain. Number 4, understanding the terrain, where to go, how to keep it safe, how to limit your exposure. And the last one is kind of with that information, where do you then move your group through it? So those are the biggies, and I want to keep this super organic and tied to everything we do. For those of you that have AIARE 1, I'm seeing this in the chat box. We've got a lot of AIARE alumni in here. I'm going to tie it back to the Bluebook, this resource. And this Bluebook changed a lot. When I first took my AIARE course in 2005, it was this color, and now it's this color. And things have changed quite a bit. And so I want to use the Bluebook, just like AIARE teaches us, kind of as a framework and a foundation for the rest of this webinar. And for me, it all starts with number 1 is assemble your group. And so for me, I learned this in some ways the hard way years ago, but you never go backwards. You don't pick the objective first and then find people to plug in there. And you don't stuff it, and go against the grain for what the Avi bulletin and the weather's telling you. So number 1, assemble your crew first. Pick the people you want to be with. I have a background in athletics, so I love team. And so the AIARE framework that talks about teamwork is really important to me. And when I think about those incredible memories I've had in the mountains, it all has to do with the partners in the team. So number 1, pick that team. Number 2, you've got to get the forecast. So that's the local weather, that's previous weather history, and of course, the Avi bulletin. When I first took my AIARE 1, again, 2005-ish, we learned a lot about really coming up with a lot of this information on our own. And I'm sure there's some people in the chat here that are from some zones that don't have the incredible resources like the avalanche centers that many of us do have. But in some of these popular areas, we've got those resources. We've got professionals that are out there every single day giving us info. So number 1, get that team together. Number 2, get the forecast. And then number 3 is the fun part. Find the place we're going to go ski and seek out the goods. And so I'm going to work with Charlie, and we're going to kind of start from scratch. And so again, going through my AIARE Bluebook, and for those of you that have been away from the Bluebook for a little bit, and you want to, feel free to kind of use this as a template to refamiliarize yourself with the framework. And if you're fresh off an AIARE course, you know exactly where I'm going with this. So I'm first going to pick the people I'm going out with. So let's just take today. Imagine we were looking for a tour today. I'm going to pick a zone near my house, about within an hour, and we'll go with the local front range spot, Berthoud Pass, just off beautiful I-70 that's always void of traffic. And so I'm gonna start with number 1, pick my partners. I'll just say I'm going with 3 people here, or we'll go with 4 people. We've got Emma, Nate, Charlie, and myself. So we've got a team of 4. Charlie, I'm going to make you unmute for a second. You're on skis, right?
Yep.
Charlie's on skis. I'll assume Nate's on skis. Emma, if you're not on skis, let me know. But we're all on skis. We're all of similar abilities, similar mindsets, and we have similar goals. So get out and have some fun, get some good turns in, and have a good, safe day. And so that brings me to the first part of I've got the team. Now I need to get the forecast. So Charlie, help me cue this up. I'm going to use some technology here to find this next step. So Charlie's just pulled up onX, and there's a lot of resources here, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going down the Bluebook, and it says discuss the current and forecast weather factors. And so for me, I need the forecast. And there's a couple of major things that are an absolute minimum that I need to get. Number 1 is going to be the temps. I want to see the highs and the lows. Number 2 is going to be wind. I want to get wind direction and wind speed, and ideally gusts. So Charlie, I won't talk too fast. I'll let you catch up a little bit. But what Charlie's doing here is he's basically using the onX resource. And again, there's many tools out there. I often use several different websites to get my weather, but if I can keep it all in one place, that makes my life easier and makes the tour planning process a lot simpler. So like I said to Charlie, I'm looking for a high and a low for the day. And again, we're going off of today, not for tomorrow. I want to see the wind, speed, and direction. And I'm looking for any significant like high winds or any big temperature sways. Those are an absolute minimum here. So Charlie, what do we have here for kind of a high and a low of today? Looks like we've got, let's see, today's February 1st. Trying to keep up.
Today's, well, we got a low of -4 because that's coming for tonight. But anyway, because we're looking at the forecast, it's null because it was a high, but tomorrow we're looking at a high of 2. Oh, it's cold, and a low of -16.
Yeah. So that's what I have. That's what I have in my book. And so I'm just writing in there, H. Well, I pulled weather earlier, so I wrote, the high right there / the low. I'd circle like a -16, or if you get a wind chill, and that's the wind chill is not so much pertinent to avalanche conditions, but it's just, what gear am I bringing? What layers are going to, what layers are going in my path to make me have a comfortable outing in the mountains? And so we've got our high and the low, which I feel pretty good about finding that info. And for all of you watching, we're pulling that from the point forecast off the Arapahoe National Forest nearest Berthoud Pass. Charlie, let's go for wind now.
So wind forecast is 10 miles an hour out of the northeast. And if you jump into this tab here, and for those of you that missed it, on our web map, you just tap your little weather icon down here to get this view. But you can also go into the hourly and look at, okay, well, actually that's midnight, like, look at the hourly forecast throughout the day. So it looks like winds coming out of the northeast, 7 to 10 miles an hour.
Fantastic. And so, yeah, Charlie, just leave that screen there. So when I first took my first AIARE course many years ago, like I didn't truly understand the importance of wind. And it's a big one. It's incredibly important because anything that changes fast in the mountains as it pertains to the Avi world is significant, and we need to pay attention to that. So any significant temperature change, any significant loading of new snow, and any significant loading that's due to wind is something that we need to really be focused on and be paying attention to. And so I'm certainly looking at wind speed and wind direction. Why wind direction? Because it's showing me where snow could be getting pulled from and transported to. And it lets me know that, I see here, it's northeast winds 10. So those are moderate winds. And so I know that if I have a winds coming from the northeast, the opposite sides are going to be loading up. So I want to be heads up. If I'm getting a northeasterly wind, I got to be looking out for the southwesterly aspects because they're going to be loaded with snow. If you have like moderate to high winds and you have continual persistent precipitation, it's multiplied by 5. And so if you get 1 inch of precipitation an hour through snow, and you have moderate to high winds, you could have 5 inches an hour on the lee side loading up with snow. And that's a pretty big deal. It makes for significant risk management decisions and can make for really fun skiing if you know how to find the right safe spots to play. So cool. So we've got our wind, we have our temps. Charlie, I'd like to see precip here now too. So just like I mentioned, if we get any sort of precip, that gets exacerbated by wind. So we've got to find out what's falling from the sky. And I'm seeing here, we're getting a 72% chance of snow and 1.6 inches. Charlie, do you know over what time frame that is by any chance?
That would be the 24-hour period. So you can go into the hourly again and see kind of snowfall per hour.
Yep.
In the hourly view.
And Charlie, stay there for a sec. So for me, this is a big deal. Not only is it going to give me the big picture view of how much precip to expect throughout the next day. If I'm going out tomorrow, I need to know what is falling up, I live in Golden, so this is like 4,000 feet higher than here. So there's more snow falling than I can see out my window. That's really important. And then it might also change how long I'm out for. You know, if it doesn't start snowing much in the morning, I could go get a quick dawn patrol mission in. And I'm not really expecting to be seeing a lot of like rapid changes. And I may not feel the need to have my head on that swivel. But if I see that it's starting to fall midday or throughout the day, it might dictate how long I'm out or even where I go. And so if I see significant snowfall, that's going to change, the rapid changes equation, like more snow, more snowfall. I might pick a zone that's a little mellower. So that's a big one. So I've got precip, I've got my wind, I have my temps. Those are kind of the bare bones that I would ever go out with. I really want to gather that intel and put it into my blue book before I go out. But there are a few additional ones that if you're up to it and you have the bandwidth to process the information, I'm also looking for recent history. So I'm looking for height of snow, like how deep is the snowpack? I'm looking for the snow water equivalent. And I'm also looking for kind of just general precip expected, like the seasonal snowpack. So I mentioned, that list of 5 things. Number 1, you've got to get really good at identifying average rain. Number 2 is rescue. The third one is understanding the seasonal snowpack. And this is where you can start to become a better backcountry traveler by really knowing your hometown layer cake, so to speak. So Charlie, I mentioned a few things. Where's a good place for me to find height of snow and SWE, or snow water equivalent?
Yeah, so in onX Backcountry, these black snowflakes are Snotel stations, which are federally distributed snow depth stations throughout the mostly the American West. So if you click on one of those, you'll get the current conditions at that station, plus a 7-day readout of snow depth, temperature, snow water equivalent, and for some of the stations that have it, wind speed.
Yeah, excellent. And Linda, I just saw your note in the chat about the multiplier. That's not scientific. That's more of a general rough example of like when you see light to moderate winds, your hackles should be going up, because that is showing you that there's rapid changes happening. And so it's just a way to remember that, whoa, if we have moderate winds and precip at the same time, that's something we really need to pay attention to, but not a scientific formula by any means. Excellent. So we've got the resource of the Snotel. And again, this is really going to vary on the folks in the audience as far as what you want to dive into when it comes to your weather info. But like I said, as a bare bones data points, you really want to keep it to highs and lows. Certainly wind, direction, and speed, and precip. In addition to that, especially in the spring, you really want to be paying attention to cloud cover, where the sun is, overnight freezing levels, and of course, the snow water equivalent allows us to really understand how heavy that snowpack is. And of course, when you do an even deeper dive, when you can really understand what's beneath the surface as far as the snowpack, it's going to put you in a better place every single season. And so those are some tools, and there are some places where you can gather that information. Obviously, beyond onX, there's lots of other places, but the Snotel link here is bringing you right towards all the Snotel sites throughout the US. So I have my forecasts as far as weather's concerned. I've got my team. Now it's time to consult the professionals at the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. And that's definitely the next place I'm going to go. So Charlie, show me how to get to the CAIC bulletin.
So over here on the left, if you tap on your snow activity mode, you'll get this kind of control screen. And by toggling on and off the Avalanche forecast layer, you'll see there's the forecast zones across the entire country, actually. And to get the forecast for it, you can just click on any of those zones, find Avalanche Forecast over here on the left, tap the forecast link, and it'll take you straight to the official CAIC forecasts, and that's true across the country for every avalanche forecast zone. It'll take you to the specific link for that area. So Jason, here's the forecast.
I see it, Charlie. So part of taking any area education is we try to help people understand a new language, and that new language is being able to decipher and decode some of the things that I'm talking about now and some of the things you're going to read in these resources. And so looking at this page, this is the Backcountry Avalanche Forecast. There are a lot of tabs and a lot of tools on the CAIC bulletin, as are all the other incredible avalanche centers throughout the US. But there's three major things that I'm looking at here. And so number one is that beautiful green turning yellow pyramid, which is our danger scale. And so if you look at that pyramid, and again, for those of you, this is, you know this, for others it might be new, you're looking at three different elevation bands. And those elevation bands are going to change based on what region you're in. So I'm at 6,000 feet now, but I grew up in Massachusetts and played in New England, and 6,000 feet is a totally different beast over there. And so it's not strict to actual elevation across the US, but it is the characteristics of the terrain in which you're in. So for example, I'm below tree line in Golden, Colorado right now at 6,000 feet, but on the top of Mount Washington at 6,000 feet, I am well above tree line. So you're looking at the avalanche bulletin, and you've got a danger scale at each elevation band. And for today, Tuesday, you've got low at all elevations across the board in Colorado in the front range forecast. I do see that, for good reason, because it's snowing out my window, that it's turning moderate for tomorrow. And it should seem obvious to you based on what I was just talking about. There's rapid changes happening. There's new precip falling when there wasn't really any precip for a few days here. And so the first thing I'm looking at, and I'm writing in my blue book under identify the avalanche problem and location, is I'm going to be writing it's low at all elevation bands on the rows. And I am going to make a note to myself that it is trending to be less stable. And so that's the first thing that I'm going to do. That's the one out of three things that I'm going to be covering when I write down the avalanche forecast. One out of three mandatory things. The next one, Charlie, scroll down past the summary. All right, so now we have to dive into our avalanche problems. And the good thing about the CAIC forecast, as in any amazing avalanche center throughout the US, is that they're pretty good at education. And obviously, AIARE is pretty good at that too. But that's part of the program, is understanding the problems. And out of the problems today, we're dealing with one of them, according to CAIC, and that is the persistent slab that we are all too familiar with here in Colorado. And the persistent slab comes about when we get this weak layer that's buried pretty far down the snowpack. But the problem in Colorado is we don't get quite as much powder as everyone thinks we do, and quite as much snow as we need to really keep that persistent slab at bay. So the seasons, that persistent slab is a constant problem, because it comes from the early season snow that then turns to rotten snow because those crystals that are near the ground get faceted. And that's because the ground is at 0 degrees Celsius, aka about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And the sky temps, the air temp is cold out here in Colorado. So that transfer of that temperature gradient, that temperature difference, makes that early season snowfall turn into basically sugar snow. And you can't make a snowball with sugar snow. And that also means it's not very cohesive and it doesn't bond well together. And so that's why we have this persistent slab. And so now I look at the problem, and I'm looking at a few more things. I'm going to look at its spatial distribution, also known as like, where am I going to find this problem in the mountains? And so we've got this rose here, this compass rose. And if you look at it from a bird's eye view, and again, I saw a lot of AIARE veterans in there, so forgive me for the recap, but you're looking at it from a bird's eye view, and we see three elevation bands. The one closest to the center is above tree line. The middle ring is near tree line, and the bottom one is below tree line. And the shaded in area here is telling me that the persistent slab problem is found on north aspects, northeast aspects, and easterly aspects above tree line. I look over to the column on the right. as to what is the likelihood. And the professionals over at the CIC are telling me it's unlikely. But if you do wake up the beast, it could go large. So the avalanches you're going to see with the persistent slab problem are small to large. And so that's important. So I would write that down in my book. I'm writing down it's low at all aspects and elevations. And then I'm going to write down number one, persistent slab. I wrote in my book, it's found on north, northeast, and east above tree line. Unlikely, small to large. If there were more problems, I'd write them in order of priority. So those are two things. So number one, the overall danger scale. Today it's low at all elevation bands, trending to moderate. So that's kind of a red flag to me, like head on a swivel, things are changing. Next up, I gotta know the problems. And today it's the persistent slab problem. Tomorrow we could have a different one based on some of the winds and new precip. But right now for today's forecast, it's the P slab. There's one more thing, and this one's the tricky one, is Charlie, bring us back to that summary. All right, so this is the part where, AIARE's changed its ways in about, a decade and a half. And it's like, listen to the professionals. They're out there every day. Their hands are in the snow. They're digging in the snow. They're out there. And so here's what they have to share with us. They're telling us, generally, safe avalanche conditions exist. Although unlikely, you may be able to trigger a large avalanche in steep north, northeast, and east-facing areas, especially in places where the snowpack is thinner. Think about the consequences of triggering a large avalanche before riding on these aspects. A storm moves into the area throughout the day on Tuesday. Depending on how the storm tracks, avalanche conditions could get dangerous early in the day on Wednesday. Watch for changing conditions and an increasing avalanche danger as the new snow accumulates. Check back tomorrow before you go into the mountains to stay on top of the changes. And so I read this, and then I read it a few more times really slowly, trying to pick out really important things from that summary that I need to remember all day long once I leave the trailhead. And so looking at this, and I'll go right to my notebook, I see large avalanches are possible to trigger on steep north, northeast, and east aspects. So I need to remember that going in the field. So I'm literally writing it in my blue book under discuss the advisory's key message. And I'm trying to think anytime I hit a north, northeast, or easterly aspect that's steep, I could trigger one of those large avalanches due to the persistent slab. Okay, check. Next up, I also pulled from that, I gotta watch out for a more shallow snowpack. Why? Colorado, again, relatively shallow snowpack. If you can wake the dragon, that big avalanche is gonna happen. The more snow you have on top of that weak layer that's typically buried closer to the ground, in this case, based on the persistent slab, the harder it is to trigger, and it's also more likely that those crystals, the really loose sugar snow I talked about, may not be as widespread where the snowpack's deeper. And so they're telling us avoid shallow snowpack because it's easier to wake the beast. And so I need to be paying attention to where it might be more shallow. And so that's a big takeaway. The other one for me that I wrote down in my notebook is rapid change. A big thing about once we hit the field is you've got to be thinking, is the nowcast syncing up with the forecast? The nowcast being, what do we see? What can we smell? What can we hear? Being a detective, taking it all in. And for me, that's a big one because if I were to look going forward, you look at Wednesday, it's going yellow to moderate. I need to be paying attention to rapid change and really be paying attention to where certain aspects throughout the terrain might be loading up with snow due to winds and precip. And so those are the three biggies. Number one, the overall danger scale. Number two, I need to know the avalanche problems because when I'm in the field, I need to relate where I am to where the problem is and make sure I'm not in the bad places. And the last one's a summary. Like I said, read the summary once and then read it again until you can really pull out from it really important pieces that are going to stick with you throughout the day. And of course, the Blue Book is a way for you to not have to memorize them. So I write them down every single morning just so I have that muscle memory of writing it. And so it hopefully sticks with me throughout the day. So now that I have that, I am going to come up with a plan to manage avalanche terrain. And so typically this happens with your partner. So I now know who my team is or my partners. Now I've got the weather. And of course, I have the Avi bulletin. So now I need to take what the pros have told me, take what I've seen from the comforts of my warm chair and often a fresh cup of coffee. And then I'm going to break it into a plan that syncs up with my risk tolerance, my partner's risk tolerance, and our goals and objectives for the day. And then from that, we need to agree on a mindset. And so things I wrote down based on this forecast in my blue book here are, I'm going to avoid steep slopes 35 degrees or greater on those north, northeast, or eastern aspects. You could certainly change that angle, right? So we know that most avalanches occur from 30 to 45 degrees. So if your risk tolerance was a little bit lower, I'd certainly go down to a more conservative measure, right? We always want big, big margins in the mountains. But I wrote down avoid steep slopes 35 degrees or greater on north, northeast, or easterly aspects. And again, this is for today's forecast where it's low at all elevation bands, not for tomorrow's where it's escalating quickly. I also wrote down assess height of snow to establish possibility of a persistent slab. And again, if it's more shallow, easier to wake the beast. I want to assess often to align changing of conditions. I'm looking for rapid loading and wind. And my mindset here, I'm always flipping back to see what the mindset of the team is to page 3, I believe. We're either going to keep it simple, we're going to limit exposure, or we're going to step it out cautiously. The mindsets are different for the AIARE rec programs as they are for the Atkins yin and yang document that he released for operational mindsets. But for today, I'd probably have it somewhere in between keeping it simple and limiting exposure for green at all levels. Tomorrow, when it's escalating to moderate, that's going to change. But I want to make sure we agree on a mindset and we stick to it. And so now I have the forecast. I've got the team. We have our mindset. I know what terrain I need to avoid and potentially where I might find good snow. Now the fun part begins. Where are we going to go riding? So Charlie's got the map up. I've been yapping for a long time. It's always easy to do that on these webinars, so I apologize. Keep the chat questions coming. I'll promise to do my best to answer them all. I've just picked Berthoud Pass. It's easy for me to get to, and we're going to keep it simple. And we're going to find some zones that I know have options for low angle riding, and then maybe some other options if the weather is not as fierce, or if for today, it's green at all aspects. If I don't see anything that's a red flag, maybe I could travel into some steeper terrain up to say 35 degrees. And so I'm going to pick a trailhead. Charlie, let's start with Current Creek. Let's start with Current Creek. So go a little higher up there. For those of you that have skied this zone, let's see, Charlie, right there. Yep. Oh, no, a little lower. It's just below Teacup Bowl. Cool. So if you're on an expedition to Greenland, there's not going to be any of these purple lines there. But that is one great feature. People often ask me in my AIARE programs, like, hey, where do we know where to go? And the answer there is talk to people, talk to experienced folks that know the zone. There's guidebooks, there's resources, right? And so if any of you own a Beacon guidebook, like these lines you see here, these are actual guidebook routes from the Beacon line of guidebooks. And so I can go either from scratch, where I'm literally looking for safe passage up terrain that looks interesting, or I could take some work out of it and just lean on what the professionals have already spent the time looking for. And so I'm going to leave that trailhead, and again, I'm going to be looking at aspects again that I think I need to maybe avoid. Those are going to be the north, northeast, and easterly. And so starting where Charlie put that A there, that's our trailhead. I'm going to be thinking, I want to, I'm traveling up a steep slope, but I can't really tell how steep that is right there. And I know I kind of told myself that I'm going to be avoiding terrain that's greater than 35 degrees. And so I'm going to pop the slope angle on there and see what we're working with. And so Charlie just flipped that over. and there's a little legend up top, and you can see that, 35 is like I'm colorblind, so, but it's a light or dark orange to red at 35. And so more like a darker red. And so anytime I start to see that darker red color, I really need to be mindful of that terrain before I plan my route there and in real time decide to travel through it, because we as a team decided that we are going to be avoiding terrain that's greater than 35 degrees, given our risk tolerance and the forecast. And so Charlie just popped that up. Now I'm looking at, the trailhead, and I see kind of a summit feature I can work towards that keeps me on mostly southerly aspects. And so I'm saying southerly because we don't think the persistent slab problem is going to be as much of an issue in that zone. And we also, if you recall to the winds, I think it looks like we were getting some northeasterly winds. And so it could be actually transporting some snow that might not be half bad to ski on the southwesterly aspects. And so that's A, it's keeping us away from the problem. B, may put a few inches of fresh there, but with that comes the responsibility to be paying attention to changing conditions. And so I'm looking at the south face, and Charlie, why don't you go ahead and draw a line that kind of starts from the trailhead and works its way more like northwest from that point. Yep, kind of up, kind of towards the red, but we don't want to get too close to it, because part of being a good traveler in mountains is knowing to avoid avalanche terrain, not only in it, but above it. So let's give that a wide berth. Great. And then we can start tacking kind of back right a little bit. Yeah, and I'm just piecing together an up track that I think is relatively gentle and is going to keep us out of avalanche hazard and allow us to do some assessment on the way out before we really commit to any terrain. And so to me, this looks like a decent up track. I do see some things that raise some red flags from the comfort of my comfortable office chair here. I do see some red there, right there. So I want to be heads up. We may need to give that a wider berth in real time, depending on how far away from the slide path we are. And then of course, I kind of took that line and traveled a little bit further to the left. Yeah, Charlie, I'll give you some time to put some markers there. And so I'm not in the field yet. I haven't met my partners, Emma and Nate and Charlie yet, but we're planning. But I need to be thinking about this, because once I hit the field, we go into the ride safely part of the AIARE framework. And a big one there is being able to recognize AVI terrain when you're in the field and stopping and having a conversation about it. So what Charlie's doing there is I'm mentioning that I see some red flags here. And so Charlie's making a note that I could potentially share this with my teammates, say, hey, when we get underneath that feature, that's called the teacup bowl, by the way, we get underneath the teacup bowl, we need to have a group conversation. What do we feel about the nowcast? And is it aligning with the forecast? And are we sticking to our plan? That's the beauty of the AIARE framework, is you have to, it keeps a lot of the subjectivity, the human factors out of it. And so where Charlie puts that point, we're kind of going to agree to stop and talk about that feature when we get to it and make a decision as a group. That's what the teamwork and travel is all about. And so Charlie put in there, and this is actually a pretty decent basic tour. I think, keeps us more or less out of the firing line. We could certainly adjust that up track if we needed to go more towards the, oh boy, Charlie's spinning me here. More towards the west if we wanted to give that a wider berth. But that allows us to see from the comfort of our chair, more or less mellow terrain. That is that small little band of orange to the left of our hazard that, I might even mark that too. There could be a convex roller in there. And again, convex rollers where you could get some loading, could be natural terrain feature. But that might be another spot that says, hey team, let's keep an eye on things here, because maybe this in real time is different than I'm seeing on the map. So slope shading is an amazing tool, but it is no substitute for what you can see in the field and measure actual slope angle in real time. So don't ever forget that. It's an incredible, incredible tool, but it's no match for actually being able to measure the slope angle in the field for real time. And so, great. So I see this. I've got our up track, and then I want to give us options, right? You always want an A and a B, and often a C and a D. And you always want them to be pretty good options. You never want an option A that pales or an option B that pales a comparison to the A. You always want two pretty good options. And so, I look at this feature, it's low at all elevations and aspects. Technically, there is no persistent slab problem on the aspects I'm looking at. So Charlie, take your cursor and move it back to the hazard, the blue one, a little higher, and then move it over to the right a little bit. Yeah, so kind of in that swooping area. So right down there, that might not be an unreasonable piece of terrain, but I really would need to assess, because we are agreeing as a team not to travel on terrain that's over 35 degrees. So I might put that as an option as a down track. So Charlie, if you want to go to the top there and kind of mark one of our potential runs, right? So I'm snapping line kind of through there, maybe give the teacup bowl a wide berth, and maybe bring us back down to near the start of the skin track. Great. And so that's an option, right? So kind of a direct line. We do go through some darker colors there. And so, we're going to need to do two things. We're going to need to make a note to, on the up track, snap a slope angle, from in real time, see if we can get eyes on that piece of terrain before we ski into it. We also have the opportunity to assess it from above. It stays pretty low angle. Looks like it's 25 to 30 degrees before it rolls over. And so we have time to make that decision as a group in the field. And so I might label that as, option A, ski run, and leave it there. And then, like I said, you always want multiple options. And so it also looks like a pretty darn good time skiing back, similar to our line of ascent. And so I might also snap another down track, Charlie, starting from the summit. That really is almost parallel to our up track, kind of keeps us out of that feature called the teacup bowl, just in case I really don't like what I'm seeing tomorrow. And again, my decisions here in choosing this piece of terrain are listen to the professionals at the CIIC, and then have a plan to take the nowcast and bring it back to the forecast. If we see anything that's grossly different from what we saw on our laptops or on onX or from any of the weather stations, like we need to avoid that situation. And so I've got two options here. I've got one that I think would be appropriate for a low avalanche danger day where no avalanche problems are found at this aspect here. But I also have another one that gives us another great option to get some potentially good ski turns in and completely avoid some of that steeper terrain if we don't like what we see when we get into the field. Other things I might add here might be transition spots. If I'm new to a team, I might actually put places to have a conversation. Hey, before we get to this bowl, I'm going to put a waypoint in there that says, hey, we need to talk about we need to snap a slope angle for teacup bowl before we go up past it, things like that. So it's a good tool to kind of generally give yourself some options. Definitely want to know a safe up track, definitely a safe down track. And this all comes back to what I said in the beginning, right? There's those 5 things. Number 1, you've got to know how to identify avalanche terrain, whether you're entering into it or it's above you. So this is a place where we can continue to make a better guess. Charlie just flipped over to satellite, which I love. If any of you have been in the Front Range and looked at the AIARE forecast the last couple of days, there was a phrase in the summary that often mentioned avoid like rocky ridge tops and outcroppings, because those are places where typically the snowpack is shallower and it often gets loaded in above tree line environments. And so I might also use the satellite function to try to identify rocky outcroppings, ridge lines, other features that the pros at the CIIC are telling me to avoid, which I can't see with the general topo. I might go to real-time satellite view and try to suss out some of these features and know places where I shouldn't be going. Fortunately, I think for this particular tour that we've mapped out, there are not too many rocky outcroppings. But yeah, if Charlie, you spin around in the back there, do what you just did. Bring us a 180 here again. Yeah, there's some great, fantastic terrain that we're actually looking at. But let's talk about that. So just going off the forecast from today, they're telling us that persistent slab is present north, northeast, and east above tree line. There you have it. I mean, we're looking at north, northeast, and eastern aspects in those gullies. We know that they're steep, right? Told us to stay away from steep aspects. And so by using this tool, or any mapping tool, but this tool right in front of us here is telling us that that zone is probably not the best choice based on what the forecasters are telling us. Cool. So Charlie, I think that's good for that one, but here's the scoop, folks. Let's say, I mentioned we always want an A and a B. And so the Current Creek parking lot only holds like 5 cars. And so I'm going to give myself another option. And so let's go back up the pass, maybe a mile, and we're going to go to the Berthoud Summit. I want to give myself another plan B just in case we get skunked at the trailhead. We don't want to be forced into making any bad decisions or skiing terrain that goes against our agreement as a touring team. And so same thing, I want some more options here. So Charlie, why don't you bring us to the Berthoud trailhead there? Boom, there you go. You've got my up track in there already. So
yeah, we cheated a little bit.
We'll speed things up.
It came fresh out of the oven.
Yeah, fresh out of the oven. And so here we are. We've got same thing. This is another set of an up track, a down track with some beta. We've got that. The black track is the up track I would select. It travels through very safe terrain. There's really no overhead hazard in that zone. And it brings me up to a spot that looks like a good transition spot. From there, yeah, and of course, one thing that's great there too is a lot of times, Berthoud Pass for me is a great dawn patrol mission. Charlie, will you bring that back up real quick? So Charlie's just snapping on the up track line, and for most of us, that's the time-consuming, part. And so what I've done now is I've drawn the line to my transition zone, and allows me to kind of estimate my timing. And so you as a touring group need to know what it takes you to roughly travel 550 feet of vertical gain. And so for some of you, it might be an hour. For some of you, it might be 10 minutes. You know what your uphill speed is. It lets you know how many laps in you'll be able to get before you have to be at your desk at 9 o'clock for a dawn patrol mission. And so this is a good one because it allows you to do some quick, mini golf style backcountry laps. But knowing your distance and knowing the elevation gain there lets you know what you're in for your outing. And for me, a lot of times it comes down to just, how far can we go? How much vert can we cover given our time frame? And so once we've covered that, we kind of know what options we have to work with. In this particular zone, we know we need to eventually get back to our car, which is down at the purple waypoint at the bottom. But I gave us some options. And let's say we're feeling good. We did a check-in with our team. We get thumbs up from everyone. Everyone's feeling great. We want to do at least 3 laps. And so again, step 1, identify the terrain that's no bueno. And so we know north, northeast, and east. To go to that section using slope shading, I see some glaring red flags kind of on those aspects that are steep. And I drew a big kind of polygon around that says, just stay out of this zone. This is not the day for it. And it doesn't align with our team's mindset. Just flat out doesn't. We're agreeing to avoid steep slopes greater than 35 on north, northeast, and east. And I just basically block that off. We're staying out of here. And so that lets myself and the rest of the team know as we start to travel up, because we are going to have this in the field at our disposal, stay away from this zone. It's tempting. I've been there. It looks really good, but it's also the site of many avalanches, including a very famous one you all probably saw, including a dog that was rescued miraculously at the last minute. So I also want to give myself other options coming off that slope. Yes, to the north, believe it or not, to the north, we are traveling into the zone that may hold the persistent layer, but we're also going to keep it low, right? So I'm looking to kind of find a nice line that might have some of that heavier snow on the northerly aspects, but I need to be smart about sticking to our social contract as a team, right? And we agreed not to travel into steep slopes on this aspect. So I've also highlighted a small convex roller there that I kind of want to investigate in real time. It doesn't mean avoid it here, but you can see in my note, convex roller, ? It means I want to stop before a member of the team rips on through there without thinking about it, and certainly exposing the whole team at the same time. So I'm looking for little spots that might need a nowcast evaluation, and that's one of them. And so I would ski that line and potentially find another path back up to the top. And so you can see with that black up track, I've put in a spot that I think is safe for two reasons. It doesn't seem to be in avalanche terrain from the comfort of my laptop and office chair. And it looks to be relatively efficient as far as elevation gain and a decent way to get back up to our starting point. There's one more line on here, Charlie. It was the last one that dives off to the other aspect. It's a kind of more graded run. Nice. Yep. And so this one drops off to more of a southerly aspect again. And so we know that there's no persistent slab problem according to the forecast on this zone. And so I drew in a spot that might provide some good turns, especially if it gets some protection from the trees. And I know it's graded because of the satellite. And I also know where it gets steep and where it's not steep. And so looks like it could actually be some fun skiing through that green section and potentially through some of that yellow and orange. But again, you'll see I also circled that zone as a we need to talk. That's an assessment zone, assessment point. It might be too steep and it might break our contract. And so that's kind of the general layout. So when it's time for me to plan a route, again, I got the team, I now have the forecast, and now I want to pick an objective that doesn't, I'm not putting a square peg into a round hole. It's got to fit. And so now I've tried to pick some options, multiple options that I think are going to fit nicely with the forecast. I'm doing a couple things. There's spots that I'm avoiding. So I'm actively looking to say, hey, this is a spot we're not going. And there's also spots that say, hey, this is a spot we need to see in real time, because technology is amazing, but there's really no substitute for taking it in with your own eyes and having that real-time discussion with your team. Again, for those of you area alumni, like we're talking the ride safely component, I'm basically setting ourselves up to have a really well-structured ride safely decision-making strategy. And so that's kind of the baseline. There are a few other things I can do. And so the three things I mentioned when it comes to the AIARE forecast: number one, what's the danger scale at the elevation bands? Number two, what are the problems? Number three, what's the summary, and then decode it. And the other one is, if anyone's ever heard the acronym ALP truth, right? So it's avalanches, recent loading, am I in an avalanche path, terrain traps, recent for the forecast, is it recent thaw, and then unstable conditions, right? So the A in ALP truth is avalanches. Have there been any avalanches in the last 48 hours? And so going back to the CIC bulletin, Charlie, there is another thing that you can dive into. So try to go to observation. Go up to the top bar. Observation, scroll down to the Avalanche Explorer, which is super cool, new feature this year. I can then, just like on onX, I can click on the front range tab, or I can even sort there. Yeah, and so Charlie, if you kind of zoom in on Berthoud, you'll see two red dots that are nearby. Boom, there they are. And so you don't need to do this for every tour, but you've got to make a note of it. So I put these in my blue book. One of them's 5 days old now, so it's beyond the 48 hours. But Charlie, just hover over one of them, doesn't matter. Yep. And so on 1:30, so 2 days ago, we had a snowboarder trigger an avalanche above tree line in a northwest aspect that was size 1. Okay, great. So for me, mental note, relatively recent, snowboarder triggered, northwest aspect, size 1. Cool. Go to the other one, Charlie. Excellent. So this one's a little older, but not to be discounted, right? So skier triggered this above tree line, northeast aspect, size 1. And so I'm taking this info, and if I really want to share a plan with my team and say, hey, everybody, we got to be heads up. There have been recent avalanches. Some of these are a little older. Looks like Oh boy, we've got some new ones that are maybe not updated on Front Range. I think we're. Just click on that one, Charlie. I don't know if it's updated yet. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm looking at any recent avalanche activity, and then I'm going to take that and I'm just going to drop a pin on onX. And as a reminder, like, hey team, this happened like right in this spot, very close to us on these aspects. And it lets me know two things. Number one, I literally can avoid this zone because it's within a mile. It's super close to us. But it also gives us really pertinent information that I can take to other similar aspects and elevations that I might encounter. And so that information just tells me, hey, this has happened in recent history, and that's a red flag, and I need to listen to it. And that's pretty much that. That's it. And so you can see Charlie has those bulleted right there. That's where the avalanche occurred. Aspect, elevation. You can also see my actual tour plan over there. Yep, and then if you scroll over a little bit more, there's the other one over there to the east. And then, so that's ones I manually put in there. I don't do it for every single tour, depending on who I'm with. But if I'm sharing and I'm collaborating with a group of 2 to 4 to 5 teammates, I'm just calling it out. Hey team, this happened. We can't ignore it. Another cool feature that I think is really neat is kind of avalanche fatality history. And so Charlie's going to hover over that icon over here, right there. If he clicks on it, it's not super pertinent to what's happening in real time, but I think as mountain travelers, it's really important for us to kind of learn from lessons of others, and also we can relate it to this actual location that we're traveling in potentially tomorrow. And so this is what happened. It's an old, it's over a decade old, this report, but you can click on it, you can read the avalanche accident, and you can learn from it, and it'll bring you right to the CAIC. So I think it's a pretty cool feature that they kind of implement those in there, and for me it also makes it kind of real, right? Like, here's a place that I'm looking at recreating, and like boom, there it is. Like, a tragic event occurred right there, really close to a zone that I'm going to ski or ride in, potentially tomorrow morning. And so it just kind of brings it back, brings it close to home for me, and it allows me to kind of keep it tight and stick to my plan. So, oh yes, of course we will do that, Michael. So Charlie, did I miss anything that we talked about? This is pretty much what I do. I pretty much get it all dialed in. I give myself options. I run it by the team, because it's always something you kind of do before you're standing at the trailhead. Usually, it should be. And then the next phase is to make it live and bring it into the backcountry. So Charlie, anything I missed based on what you were hoping to share with folks?
No, I mean, yeah, we'll switch over to the phone here really quickly and show you. But the beauty of it is that everything that we just did in here automatically syncs to the phone. So no duplicated work, no exporting, it just automatically syncs to your phone. The other thing I wanted to call out was, as you saw when we switched to this sort of second plan, like Jason did this plan before, and I'm actually the recipient of a share. So if you share with somebody, like it'll show their name, and if Jason were to go into his account and edit this route, it would update in my view of it here as well. So as like a trip leader, as if you're trying to kind of put together this plan and share with other people, and like Jason says, he's going through all that calculus for each of these different things. If he makes updates, makes changes, adds new things, it'll automatically sync to the whole group that you've shared it with. And so with that, switch us over to the mobile phone.
Yeah, and try to pull up, like, it gets real noisy. So you got to be good with the feed. I mean, it's true with any mapping app, but just pull up the run list again, Charlie, like the Beacon Guidebooks information. Cool. And then like zoom in a little bit so folks can kind of see like how close we are to kind of existing runs. Yeah, so it gives you an idea. Like, there are resources out there in the more heavily trafficked zones like Front Range of Colorado. But yeah, there's some lines there. So yeah, that gladed run was pretty close to a line they call Trapper's Glade. My down track is pretty much spot on for the main line. If anyone skied Bertha, that's kind of like a go-to reliable little quick mission. yes, so that's just another resource. Like bring it back to being able to use guidebooks that are integrated into the app that you're already working off of. And so, yeah, this is what this. I mean, we're still in the plan function of the AIARE framework, right? Like we're planning our trip based around the team and the forecast, and we feel good about it. We're sticking to our mindset. We're sticking to our plan to manage avalanche terrain. It's like now it's time to go ski. And so we get our kit together. I'm going to write down that I've got the med kit, the rescue sled. Charlie's bringing the tarp. Emma's going to bring the inReach. We've got our plan dialed. We know our turnaround time. We know our meeting time. We show up at we have everybody get this on their app because redundancy is amazing. Of course, we're all carrying a map and compass, but if you've got, 4 people in your touring party with lots of battery life, more often than not, that compass is staying in your pack. So, you've got everyone teed up. I've shared this with every single member of my team, again, for redundancy. And because, part of being in that team is you listen to every voice. And if everyone can kind of be part of the navigational, decision-making, that's really what makes it an A team. And so everyone's got this on their phone. Then there's one last step. There's really spotty service at Berthoud Pass. You're not gonna be able to pull, LTE 5 bars on this. So you've got to make it available offline. Charlie, can you show us how to do that?
Yep. So once you have it on your mobile phone, if you tap offline maps down here at the bottom, hit new map, choose your resolution. For ski touring, I almost always choose 5 miles because you want to, if you want to look at an individual tree on satellite imagery, that's the best. Center it around your area. You can name it if you'd like, if you're organized.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like no matter what you do, make your tools available offline. And like Charlie said it, try to go back to the, can you do that one more time? I always make the res right there. So he's hovered over 5, hover back over 10, just so everyone can see it. Or click to 10. Yeah, just go back, and if you really want as much detail as you possibly can get, if you can handle it based on your phone and data size. And so, yeah, I'm almost always making it the highest resolution. So he's done that. He's saved it. Every member of the team has saved it, and now we've got it. We've got it on our phone. We're like good to go as our first line of defense for nav, which is.
And one thing, and one thing I'd say with the offline maps is we automatically pull in all of the layers, so you don't have to specifically say I want slope angle or aerial or topo. We package it all and bring it in. So basically everything that we looked at is available offline, with the exception of things that require network, like weather forecasts, for example. So some of that gets cached, but it doesn't necessarily come offline in the same way. But all of the mapping data is available offline. So if I were to wait, did it finish? Yeah, it finished. So if I were to flip to airplane mode, I can still zoom in around and get the highest resolution data.
Right on, Charlie. So fast forward, next cup of coffee, we're in the car, we're driving to Berthoud Pass. We all meet at the trailhead, and let's say we went to Current Creek, but it was packed, so we went back to the Berthoud Summit. So yeah, Charlie, no, you're good right there. And so we're gonna ski off the Berthoud Summit, and we do our trailhead check like a good group of backcountry tours. We reconfirm the plan. We all agree on the same mindset that we talked about the night before. We all agree on our strategy to manage avalanche terrain and keep it safe. We're going to go over gear again. We're going to do our transceiver checking those 3 things. Number 1, that we have battery life. Number 2, that we can be found. And number 3, that we can find someone else. We confirm that we have our, again, transceiver, shovel, probe, and we start touring. And one, if someone's never been here, you're going to, unless you have that amazing mountain sense, you use tools to find your way. And so you can certainly use the onX tool to actually navigate in real time. It's going to give you a blue dot and orient you, to your direction. And you could follow that track, of course, entering your responsibility as backcountry traveler to be, you're now in the ride safety component. And so number 1's like, monitor conditions along the way. So as we're moving through this tour plan, it's our goal to say, hey, or it's our job to make sure we are making sure that the conditions are aligning with the forecast and nothing's out of the ordinary. Nothing's going to affect our existing plan. As we continue up that black line kind of towards the top, we might be looking over at that area that we decided was a no-go, but that shouldn't really matter. We already decided we're not going there. So it really shouldn't make much of a decision, an interesting conversation, because we've already blocked it off as a no-go zone. But then we're gonna, we get to the top. Let's say we decide, hey, the northerly aspects, like skiing pretty good. Let's duck off to the north. And we now know that, hey, that P slab, that persistent slab problem, like it's over there, according to the professionals. So let's just go about this safely. We might ski down a little bit, but we're gonna stop above that small little oval that we drew the night before, because it's definitely time to check in with the group now. So we've kind of agreed that we're going to assess that little spot. How does it look in real time? How does the nowcast compare to what we saw from the comforts of our laptops? And we're going to make a decision whether we ski through it, ski around it. But all that comes down to making sure we stick to our plan to manage avalanche terrain. And so let's just say it's not that steep. We can follow that line down and move on with our day. A big thing that I ask all of my Avis students and my touring partners, that I expect my touring partners to really be paying attention to this, is the question of, are we in avalanche terrain right now? It gets asked 1,000 times in Area 1 course for obvious reasons. You've got to be really good at determining if you're in avalanche terrain or if you're underneath it, exposed to it. And so there's really kind of 3 major tools that I use to define that. Number 1 is slope angle. Like, what can we see with our own eyes, and how can we measure it? And so there's lots of tools to do that. There's apps on the phone. There's actual slope meters that you can bring out with you. There's a lot of cool tricks, but unless you can perfectly eyeball it, which I can't, use a tool to define the actual slope angle. We made an agreement as a team to avoid certain angles, and so we got to stick to that. So you've got to be actually using a tool in the field to make sure that you're avoiding avalanche terrain. That's one component. Another is visual cues, right? Does it look like we're actually in a slide path? What's tipping us off to that? Do we see flagged trees or damaged trees or no trees at all? Are we in a spot that looks like snow comes down here at a high rate of speed regularly and breaks things? So just using your eyes to assess actual real-time slide paths, like, are we in avalanche terrain? And then often, especially in like near tree line and often below tree line environments, you look around, but you can't see that well. You can't see above you in real time because your view is obscured, and you may have forgotten from the map you looked at the night before. And so this is another place I encourage students and my touring partners and myself, like, pull out a map, look at it, what's above us. Often using slope shading in real time might give us an idea. Anyone who's taken an Avi course knows, like, it's all about your level of certainty. Like, if you're not certain, like, don't do it, right? Really do everything you can to increase your degree of certainty before you make a move in the backcountry, because the consequences, if they exist, like, may or may not be worth it. So it's your job to use as many tools and resources as you can to really increase your certainty with every single decision you make in the backcountry. And so I just named a few, but those are some of the biggies that I would encourage you all to use when asked the question, like, hey, am I in avalanche terrain right now? To recap, slope angle. There's tools to assess that. Use them. Number 2, look around you. Like, technology is amazing, but like, no substitute for like looking around you, and do you see evidence of a historical slide path or recent avalanche activity or recent avalanches? And then, of course, another one, especially when your view is obscured, like, what's above us? How can we assess that using another tool to show us what might be looming overhead if our views is really blocked from where we're standing? And so I'm doing that all day long. I'm going through the ride safely checklist. I'm monitoring conditions along the route. I'm checking in with the team. I'm recognizing avalanche terrain. And then, of course, the last one in the ride safely is using terrain to reduce our risk and limit our exposure. And so, again, another tool like, hey, maybe we nailed it. Maybe we picked a tour plan that was like perfect, could have been better. It stuck to our plan to manage Abbey terrain. It kept us out of harm's way. And we all happened to like find the goods. We found the good snow and it was perfect. But sometimes, you may deviate a little bit left or right from the actual line. And that's where I'm going back to a tool to really make sure that we're picking the right line. And again, using my eyes, my ears, my mountain sense and technology to help out in the field in real time. Those are kind of the biggies. Charlie, what did I miss as far as features in the field? I'm constantly going back to my navigational apps and just really helping orient myself, because if you don't know what aspect you're on, you can't bring it back to the Abbey problem. If you don't know you're on a north, northeast, or easterly aspect, you don't know you're in the potential firing zone for that P-slab problem that we were warned about. And so I'm using that mapping app to understand where I am, both in elevation, where the danger scale may exist. I'm using the app to orient myself and actually navigate. I'm using the app to remind me of places to avoid and places to assess. And I'm certainly using it with slope shading and topography to identify what is above me and what may be like below me if I'm going to explore a zone that may be slightly different than the exact line that I drew in there the night before.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is, from a feature perspective, I think is that you can like GPS track yourself in the app as well, which in my experience too is really useful, because like Jason said, as you go out there and you have a plan, but you may deviate from that plan based off of the nowcast or like things that you experience in the field, or you measure a slope and it's steeper than you thought and you divert around it. I track every single one of my ski tours, because then that becomes this like library of all of the places that you went. It's like, hey, I went to this zone, but I diverted around here because of XYZ. So keeping track of where you actually went becomes a thing that you can debrief on later, and a thing that you can reference like when you go back out. And whether it means tracking on your watch, you can then import it into onX, and onX kind of is like a nice way to keep a library of the decisions that you make when you're actually out in the field. Jason, there was one question we got in the chat, which is I think a really good point to go over, which is the question was, do you feel there is an issue with people using this app without proper training to feel bulletproof and heading out? And I think one thing I just want to say to that is that, super good question, and something we think about all the time. And I think everything that Jason just said here is like, I think what we believe, which is that this tool like augments the education and the experience that you gain like through AIARE and through like other formal sources. I don't think I think learning how to use this tool and how that applies to your safety in the backcountry is like an important part of this. So, and it's also like taking slope angle is a good example. I think I wanted to kind of touch on this earlier, but the, slope angle is a tool. It has limitations. The data sources that we use are anywhere from 3 meters to 10 meters in resolution. So that means that if it's 10 meters resolution in your area, then you're only seeing, a 30 foot by 30 foot square pixel to represent some element of the slope. And those are limitations that can still be useful when you're trying to come up with a macro plan. But as Jason said, when you actually go out there and you have to be like heads up on the ground and sort of understand the things that you're looking at. Oh, look, I just did the snow dance in onX Backcountry too. If you shake it, you'll get, it'll start snowing, turns out.
Yeah, Charlie, I totally agree with that. Like so to answer your question, I forget who asked that. Is it Jeremy? There's no substitute for what you see in real time, right? There's so many tools out there that are an incredible benefit to us. guidebooks have been around for a long time, and just because an author put it in there and said it's a line doesn't mean it's safe. Same thing with slope shading. Like, it gives you a rough idea, but don't put all your chips on the table when it comes to technology. A computer with a rough idea of slope angle, like a couple degrees could make a big difference, and it's up to the individual to make that call in real time. And I feel like I've stated that enough times this evening. But I think any sort of information that can give you, another data point, like your job as a backcountry skier or rider is to be a detective. And so it's another tool and a resource to help you build that case for making good decisions out there. Charlie, looks like you had a question there about building exclusively on the phone.
Oh, sorry, I had to find the mute button. Yeah, no, the phone and we did a lot of the demo in the browser Webmap, but it shares the same functionality with the phone. The doing it on the web is nice. You have a big screen. The 3D is really smooth. You can really fly around in a nice way, but functionality totally shared between phone and web.
Yeah, Charlie, one thing before we answer any other questions, I'll just talk about this. I talk about it with every AIARE student is the debrief, right? So the last part of the AIARE decision-making framework is the debrief. So we've executed our tour plan, hopefully seamlessly. We've tracked it, which I'm going to get to in a second, is a helpful learning tool. And then it's time to debrief. And when I debrief, I really go back and assess a few things. Number one is did we operate as a team? And does that mean, did we travel together, and do we actually make decisions together? Do we listen to every single voice? Did we challenge those assumptions? And did we respect any veto if any member of our team decided hey, I'm not up for this, let's turn around. And then I go back to ride safely, reflecting in the debrief portion of my outing. Did we actually continue to monitor conditions as a group? Did we check in with each other constantly? Did we recognize avalanche terrain? Did we assess it accurately in the mountains? And were we able to actually use terrain to limit our exposure and manage risk? And so I typically go through that and see how it went. And then I ask myself 3 more questions. Number one, what part of the day, where were we most at risk? Sometimes it has to do with Avis terrain. Sometimes it's during a spicy ski descent. Maybe at a really popular area, you might be dodging, rogue skiers coming downhill. It's just you defining where you are most at risk. The other one is, hey, were there any times today that we got lucky? Did we make any decisions that maybe we wouldn't have made, if we were to redo this outing? Did we kind of get lucky? Did we center punch it down a line that was maybe a little steeper than we agreed upon as a team? So I'm always asking myself, these 3 questions. One is, where are we most at risk? Number 2, did we get lucky at any point today? And the last one is, if we were to repeat this exact tour tomorrow, what would we do differently? And that could be, we might have picked a different line. You could go back, look at your map and adjust it. It might also be something simple like, hey, we wouldn't even left our house. We wouldn't have left the car. The conditions were so bad. Or we would have got up 3 hours earlier because the conditions were so good. And it could be something as simple as, I would have brought an extra pair of gloves or an extra couple ounces of coffee, something like that. So just always being reflective on your day is going to make you a much better mountain traveler faster, if you're able to take those experiences and then debrief on them and then build upon them. Additionally, the last thing there that I wanted to add to debrief is, if you do run a track, like Charlie mentioned, you can go back and look at it and compare what you saw from your screen to what you're actually able to see in the mountains, and then have much better, be more calibrated when you go out and do a similar tour again.
Awesome. Well,
hold on. So quick, I think there was one question about Bluebird Backcountry. I work full-time for the Colorado Mountain School, and I am actually teaming up with Bluebird with Erica Lee over there to do a presentation. So keep your eyes peeled for a joint Colorado Mountain School and Bluebird presentation. We will be doing some events together. Any other questions out there, folks? Happy to answer anything to help kind of build your skill sets in any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming. You guys did an awesome job of answering questions as they came up. And the chat will be saved since this is being recorded. So those questions that are coming in now, just in the last few minutes, we'll be sure and get answers to folks who are asking us questions with the email address that you registered with. Sorry, I've got a dog in here who is suddenly very excited that we're wrapping up, I guess. So Rooster. Sorry. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. This recording will be posted on the AIARE YouTube channel, which I'm going to paste that into the chat right now. So that'll be up there in the next couple days. And then we will also send that out to everybody who registered. So Charlie and Jason, thank you both so much. That was awesome. I feel like I learned a lot too, and I'm already an onX user. So this was really awesome. Folks, thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everybody.